All right, everyone. Once again, welcome to our guest lecture series. Great to have you all back. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we are recording this session, so please do keep your video turned off if you can throughout the talk, just to protect your privacy above all else. All right. It's my great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker for this afternoon, Graham Kelley. Graham is a relatively new volunteer, although he has contributed already to some work here at the museum. Um, but what I want to stress in this introduction is I was super excited by some of the field work that Graham got to do over the years. And he talked about it during his interview in applying to be a volunteer. And I said, that's some amazing work. You really have to come and talk to the other volunteers. Not only is there some really interesting science behind the field work that he has done, but also I hope it might be kind of like an inspiration for the rest of us to consider going out and contributing to field work on our own if folks here haven't already done so. So with that, let me turn the Zoom over to you, Graham. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Graham Kelley, and I was fortunate enough for my senior year of college to be able to travel to Queensland, Australia, and really conduct some interesting research. And that's what I'd like to share with you all today. So my presentation was done with the School for Field Studies, in which we had about a month or 2 months to work on an independent project. And I had a few other group members. And basically, this presentation focused about our research on the application of syntropic farming to forest restoration. And this involves a case study that was done with Mabi forests on cinder cone volcanoes in the Atherton Tablelands, which is in Queensland, Australia. So that's what I will be presenting on. For starters, let me go into what syntropic farming is. Syntropic farming is a method of farming that was popularized by Ernst Gotch in 1995 within Brazil. So while monoculture farming controls the natural processes of an ecosystem using fertilizers and pesticides, this method kind of works with and amplifies those natural processes, with some benefits being the reduction of artificial fertilizers and pesticide use, a year-round harvest, sustainable soil quality, and the persistence of animal life instead of taking out animal life from that environment. This on the right is Ernst Gotz.
From Christian Waters to Everyone, which university, college did Graham?
One moment. If we could just save some of the chat questions because mine goes transcribes out loud, I would be appreciated. So thank you very much. So right here, we can see a little example of what monoculture farming is, which is traditionally used across the world and very much in the US. So on the right, it's a field, as you typically see of just one single crop, and it's grown in mass for miles around. Whereas on the left, you see Ernst Gotch's principle, where it's many different species grown together that help support one another, create a year-round harvest, and basically create a more sustainable ecosystem where the plants are supporting one another instead of being reliant on fertilizers or pesticides. So let me go into some of the background of these concepts I'll be going into. So the Atherton Tablelands are an area in Queensland, Australia that is displayed on the right here. It's a very fertile plateau that is commonly used for agriculture. It's a flat grassland with 7 inactive volcanoes on it, which I'll be getting into later. It was once covered in a type of forest known as Mabi forests, which were then converted into a very fertile farmland, and then later, after drained of that fertility, into cattle pasture, which they are now today. What then is a Mabi forest? A Mabi forest is a type of forest. It is not a Mabi tree, a Mabi plant. It is a type of forest that is characterized by having a very layered canopy, and that layered canopy allows for light to permeate down to the ground level and cause a lot of dense vegetation like bushes and woody vines there, with some typical species being the black bean, white cedar, and red cedar. It's known to have very fertile basalt soil, which is very important because such soil is very ideal for farming, which makes it a really big target for those wishing to convert and deforest areas and turn them into farmlands. So of the original Mabi forest that exists in the world, and these Mabi forests are millions of years old, only about 4.5% remain into the modern day, and that's about 860 hectares. And to give you a real sense of how large that is, it's very small. It's about only 2.5 central parks. So that's an incredibly small area for a forest that's been around for millions of years. So we have to realize that such a small percentage of it remains, yet it's such an ancient forest, and it's really important to our species and just the world in general that it's important to preserve. Moving forward, this shows a little map of where the Mabi forests today are. So the majority of that 4.5 remaining percent is in the Atherton tablelands, which is where I focus my research on. There's small fragmented pieces in the Shipton Flats a little north of this, but those fragmented pieces are very small, and you have to consider that of these two areas where it exists today, they're very separate. There's not a lot of movement of species and seeds and genetic flow between these two populations. It's also important to mention that it's such an important area that it's a wet tropics World Heritage Site to this day. These are some of the species that you may find there. So there's a lot of different unique tree species, as well as there's the cassowary, which, as anyone who's ever been to Australia or maybe lived in the woods there for a little while, it can be a little scary to run into a cassowary in the woods, but they're a really beautiful species. There's also a tree kangaroo species that the Aboriginal tribes that used to live
Marcella has joined the meeting, and Davenport has joined the meeting.
Sorry, one second. So this is one tree kangaroo species that was known to the indigenous tribes as the Mabi, which is where the Mabi forest then gets its name. So this is a cinder cone volcano, and to those who don't know, it's the smallest and most common type of volcano that you may see in the world. There's only about a 30 to 40% slope on it, which is pretty steep for a volcano. There's about 7 of these cinder cone volcanoes that can be found within the Atherton tablelands, yet all of them have been deforested, fragmented, or really isolated.
Davenport has joined the meeting.
That have been very much isolated among a sea of cattle pasture. So there's about 7 of these cinder cones in the Atherton tablelands, and it's one of these cinder cones that I'm going to be talking about today. So what was the task we were assigned with? We had to devise a method to reforest a nutrient-poor, steep-sloped, isolated, deforested, weedy cinder cone volcano with Mabi forest, a rare forest type. And that's quite a task. And to give some more sense of the gravity of this situation, it's a very rare forest type, but also the research advisor we were working with has spent the last 10 years trying to get access to one of these cinder cones and trying to find some landowners who are willing to let us attempt reforestation on it. And I happen to be lucky enough to go the year that we did get access. And we were tasked with, in my group of 4 people, finding and exploring different methods to reforest, and then eventually proposing these methods that would then hopefully be chosen by those landowners and by researchers to be implemented. So what is the cone that we were given? It was Peter and Loma Mormon who were lucky enough or fortunate enough to bless us with their cinder cone volcano. They had a small farm here, but they had, because the nutrients in the soil have been so depleted, and even the grasses were poor for cattle, that they actually made a flower farm that they're all potted plants. They really didn't rely on the ecosystem or the area itself for any of their farming. So they were kind enough to let us use their cinder cone. This cinder cone has gone by many names over the years. Many in the area refer to it as one of the pinnacles or one of the 7 sisters, one of those 7 sisters referring to the Aboriginal tribes that called these 7 cinder cones the 7 sisters because of some local religious significance that they had. This cinder cone in particular was deforested in 1980, and it has an area of about 9.1 hectares with a slope of 36 to 48 at different areas of the cinder cone degrees, which is extremely steep.
Jim Darcy has joined the meeting.
Sorry. It has an average at the coldest time, 17.2 degrees Celsius temperature, rising to its hottest season at 31.8 degrees. And you have to really consider that this is on average, but it can reach a lot of extremes. And not only is this covered in, it's not just grass species, it's invasive grass species that are really hard to manage and not natural to the area. What issues do we face when we're trying to say, how are we going to reforest the cinder cone? Well, for starters, there's poor water retention, there's increased winds, there's these invasive weed species that I mentioned, there's increased sun temperature and reduced soil quality. You can see a little picture on the right, which is taken while I was walking through our cinder cone, And, you can see it's a large cinder cone that's covered in a diversity of weeds and grasses, woody plants that just make it really hard to come up with a uniform solution. So that's why I want to remind everybody the severity of these issues I've mentioned very much on location, not location of the cinder cone, but where on the cinder cone. Would water retention be better at the top or bottom? Would wind be increased at one side that faces the wind versus that doesn't? Sun and temperature exposure, would that be worse at the top or would it be worse at the bottom of which was subject to more agricultural use? So I want you to keep these things in mind to know that the solution we have to come up with can't be one uniform solution. It has to be something that can adjust to this specific environment. And why then did we choose Syntropic? Syntropic is a method of farming. Why would I choose it for reforestation? Well, I'm not trying to change the method we're using. We're trying to devise a method. I more wanted to change the mindset we approached it with. And on the right, you're going to see Neil Hawes. He's a fourth generation farmer who's been living in Australia his whole life. And he spoke to us and told us basically a really interesting story of the issues he faced and what those issues kind of forced him or inspired him to do. As a fourth generation farmer, he saw that with each generation, they were earning less and less because they had to put more money into the business and were getting at most what their ancestors got in return, if not less. And every year he had to put more money into fertilizer, more money into labor, and more money into pesticides. And the issues he faced were a lot of the issues we ourselves were facing with this cinder cone. And I felt that whatever solution he must have found for his issues could possibly apply to us. And he told us about Syntropics. So he was about a week away from selling his farm until he heard about Syntropics and gave it one last effort. As a fourth generation farmer, this land was really important to him. So he was willing to try anything. And this was kind of a last ditch effort. And it worked. His Syntropic methods worked. And I felt that if he's faced with the same issues that we were faced with, and he used Syntropic methods to solve these issues, that maybe we could do the same. And I'm going to remind you guys what the issues that were faced were: poor water retention, high winds, invasive weeds, increased sun and temperature exposure, and reduced soil quality. And now I'm going to go into those specific issues and the Syntropic methods that he used and that I kind of modified to treat this. First off, we have water retention in soil. So you have to consider volcanic rock has a lot of vesicle fill, is very vesicle filled, a lot of holes. And that kind of makes it so that, let's say you're watering the tree at the top, you're watering it, that water is just going to go right down the side of the slope. And as I mentioned, cinder cone volcanoes are pretty steep, and ours was very particularly so. So we have that as an increased issue compared to maybe a flat land. So additionally, there's increased sun and wind exposure on that cinder cone, which makes it so that any water you're putting into the soil, even if that soil can retain it, it's going to dry up really quickly. And from so many years of agricultural use and cattle pasture, that soil has lost its nutrients and become very sandy, which once again doesn't hold moisture well. So the solution he came up with was banana plants. And I'm going to get into these different solutions and you're going to see a theme among them: banana plants. And that's really because this was the leading method that we chose to approach this issue. And banana plants are not something naturally found in a Mabi forest. This is just a plant species we used instead of fertilizers, instead of all these different artificial solutions. We really focus on banana plants as a solution. So first off, for soil retention, they use something called banana stalk mulch. And they have two different methods that I kind of combined and altered to make it really specific for restoration, for saplings. And that banana stalk method that we came up with was a two-step layering of stalks. So the first step of which, let's say you have a sapling, you surround it in basically a donut shape with a diced stalk mix. And this is just taking the stalk of a banana tree or a banana plant and dicing it up. And when you surround a plant with that diced mix, those diced banana plants release moisture in 1 to 2 weeks at a really steady, slow pace. If you were to just go up there, plant a sapling, and then water it, you're going to have the issue of that sapling can only intake that water so quickly. Most of that water is going to be lost to the soil and drained down that side of the slope. So we wanted a solution that slowly releases water.
Kathy W. has joined the meeting.
We wanted a solution that would slowly release that water. And we came up with this two-step solution. First off, being that diced mix. And a benefit of dicing it is that it also has a really quick decomposition time. And that decomposition as a side effect has a lot of nutrients being released in this poor soil. And this is what I'm going to get into throughout the presentation of a side effect that we faced is only that there was more nutrients in the soil. The second stage of this is on top of that mulch that really gives a boost of moisture and nutrients within the first 1 to 2 weeks.
They them has joined the meeting.
The second stage of this is on top of that diced mix, you have a layered mix of halves. And those banana stalk halves are much larger and they decompose much slower. But that also means that they steadily release moisture over the course of the first 3 to 4 months. When you couple those things together and imagine what it's like for the sapling, as soon as that sapling's put in the ground, for the first 1 to 2 weeks, it has a boom in moisture that's really steady. It's not something where it's too fast for that sapling to intake. It's a really steady pace that gives that early sapling the water it needs at the consistent rate it needs, as well as nutrients. And then that consistent but slow release of moisture continues for the first 3 to 4 months of that sapling's life when planted, which just makes it so that that sapling is getting a really good start.
Nelson Mark has joined the meeting.
So that sapling is getting a really good start to its life once planted. For the issue of high winds, we have to consider that this cinder cone volcano is in the Atherton Tablelands. And for more background, the Atherton Tablelands are a highlands area. And this cinder cone is a raised, steep-sloped volcano on a highland area, which just makes it so that is increasingly exposed to winds. It's also surrounded by only pastoral lands for as far as the eye can see, pretty much. So you have no windbreak that's really breaking up the wind current and making it easier for a sapling to be able to resist that wind. You also have to consider that, as I mentioned before, the challenges that these saplings are facing once planted, these challenges vary based on location on the cinder cone. So the southeasterly winds can affect different areas of the cinder cone differently. So for heightened wind, once again, you're going to see the theme of banana plants as the solution. Syntropic farmers use something called a J method, which is, if you can see the little picture I have on the right of a banana plant and the arrow I have through it. You grow a banana plant to about 2 weeks to a month old, and then you cut at that point, which is known as the atypical dominant point. And when you cut at that point, you may think, oh, you're killing the banana plant, but instead you're making it so that that banana plant is gonna regrow at an accelerated rate compared to what it would naturally have just planted from the start. So you're making a seed essentially that's going to grow rapidly. And if you plant that seed or that atypical dominant point upside down, it's going to rapidly grow, but it'll be able to adjust for itself being upside down by growing in a J shape. It'll go down, curve, and then go upwards and breach the ground, which is really helpful because that J shape makes it really firmly cemented into the soil. And that large banana plant, that they grow really quickly and have very large leaves, creates a really strong, sustainable windbreak that can support saplings and protect them from that increased wind. The added side effect that you have for doing something like this is only positive, as it prevents erosion. An additional added side effect is after those saplings have gotten to an age where they don't need the windbreak anymore and they're strong enough to survive on their own, then you can remove the stalks and remove the banana plants and use them for other areas of the cinder cone for your mulch or whatever you need. Additionally, for the sites that may face a little more wind exposure, we don't want to just put in the same saplings everywhere. We may want to use older saplings that are a little more resistant and use those older saplings that can really take the wind, but also couple that with the use of a J-rooted banana plant. Weed encroachment. So weeds and woody bushes, as I've mentioned before, especially invasive ones, were just so common in this area, not only on our cinder cone, but everything around us was grassy plains. And for these grassy plains, you can use pesticides to wipe out all the seeds on the cinder cone or wipe out all the weeds on the cinder cone. And those pesticides will probably work really well. They'll probably kill up every weed that's on that cinder cone. And typically we would use something like Roundup. But you have to consider that pesticides, it costs a lot to spray a whole cinder cone of 9.1 hectares with pesticides. Additionally, those pesticides may not be specified to a certain weed species.
Nelson Mark has left the meeting.
Pesticide cost is high, but also there's unknown consequences and unintentional consequences where that Roundup that we put in the soil could later negatively impact the saplings and really stunt their growth. So when we treat weeds, we want to have a method that doesn't have these unknown, unintended negative consequences, but also supports this area because it's a cinder cone that once deforested, it's surrounded by a sea of grassy plains that are going to keep trying to encroach into our cinder cone. And even once deforested, this is going to be a continued problem we're going to face. So some different methods that we can use to treat this are, first off, fire. There's controlled burns that you can do that really wipe out all this life on it, wipe out all these weeds and woody bushes, and through burning them, it releases a lot of material and nutrients back into the soil that's going to kind of boost and provide nutrients for the later growth of saplings. Additionally, for weeds, you can use grazing species. One method being you fence off the perimeter of the cinder cone, release a lot of heavy grazing species, will eat those weeds and woody plants, and really wipe out those weeds, and then in doing so, through their feces, release nutrients back into the soil. And lastly, you're going to see the use of banana plants, which is a theme throughout this presentation. But we're going to couple banana plants with the use of pumpkin plants. And that may seem odd because neither of these species are a Mabi forest species, and neither of them are intended for the long term of this Mabi forest. They're only really tools to help through syntropics make this environment more sustainable for those future saplings. So how does the banana plant and pumpkin method work? You grow both banana plants and pumpkins throughout this cinder cone or whatever plots you're going to use for that next planting season. When you grow these two plants together, pumpkin is going to initially boom in its growth, and pumpkin plants grow outward. It's not up like other species. They're going to grow outward and have a lot of big leaves that are really going to shade out any of the weeds you're going to have in that area. So that pumpkin plant is going to boom, shading out any of the invasive grass species you have. But then what are you left with? Is it much of a benefit to go from a grass-covered cinder cone to one covered in pumpkin plants? Because that's not a Mabi forest. Well, by the time that pumpkin plant is going to really fill up the cinder cone, those banana plants are going to be at an age where their leaves are coming out. And those leaves, if the banana plants are planted close enough together, those leaves are going to shade out any of those pumpkin plants that remain. So your first stage is using pumpkin plants to take out the weeds. And then the next stage is going to be using banana plants to take out the pumpkin plants. But why not just use the banana plants from the start? Well, the benefit is by using the pumpkin plants, you're really putting a lot of roots into the soil and firming it up. So one of the side effects we're having is it's going to be preventing erosion in the future. So this method shades out weeds, it solidifies the soil, but also, afterwards you're left with a bare cinder cone with no weeds, no pumpkins, only banana plants. And those banana plants can then be used for your next stage, as I mentioned previously, of water retention or a water retention mulch for your later sapling planting. Another issue is sun exposure and temperature. So as I mentioned, this is a highland area. And on that highland area, this is a cinder cone that is raised and subject to different different sun exposure and temperatures because it's so elevated. There's really a lack of shade you have to consider. When you reforest an area, usually there's some trees around that help provide some shade coverage, but here it's only grassland. Any sapling is going to be in direct exposure to any sun and really facing that temperature challenge. Additionally, Mabi forests can be a little sensitive to change. They've existed for millions of years, but with climate change, we want a solution that, we want to put a Mabi forest there that's going to survive now, but we also want to put a Mabi forest there that's going to survive and be able to adjust and handle change in the future. Additionally, the sun exposure really dries up the soil and takes out moisture from it. So there's a lot of issues that come with just being more close to the sun. And once again, that theme appears of banana plants. Those banana plants, as mentioned before, when grown really close together, can shade out weeds or shade out pumpkin plants. But if they're grown a little more spaced out, they can provide just the right amount of shade to allow these saplings to grow. And one method we came up with is if you take the cinder cone and divide it into rings going from top to bottom, those lower rings can
Dan Jacobs has joined the meeting.
Those lower rings can be reforested first. And if those lower rings are reforested first, where the sun exposure is minimal compared to the top, and they're successful, as you go up the cinder cone, you're getting increased sun exposure, yet at the same time, more of a foundation of other plants that can provide some shade. You have to consider also that when we put that protective mulch layer down that releases water into the soil, it's also protecting that soil from being dried up too quickly. And the reason we use the two layers of halved stalks and then the mulch stalk is that that first layer of halved stalks decompose slowly, and that can be accelerated with sun exposure to make it more efficient in decomposing, but also really protect the ground and lock in that moisture so it's not directly exposed to the sun and going to dry up immediately. And lastly is a really important point that, is, if anything, the hardest solution or the hardest problem we face, and a problem faced by any farmer anywhere in the world, a lack of soil quality and a reduction in soil quality. We have to consider that poor soil quality is many things. It's a lack of a seed bank. And for those who don't know, let's imagine a forest. The trees that release seeds, some seeds grow into new trees. Some seeds are eaten by animals and spread throughout the environment. But some seeds just stay in the ground. They don't grow, they don't do anything, and they lie dormant. And let's say that forest is one day burned down and all the trees are wiped out. Those dormant seeds can reactivate and basically bring that forest back to life. But it's been since the 80s that this forest has been wiped out, and that seed bank is almost entirely lost. So we can't just depend on that seed bank to bring back a Mabi forest once we've cleared the cinder cone. Fungi and bacteria that are really essential for the soil and keeping it healthy and locking in nutrients have also been wiped out, because the previous farmers used a lot of pesticides that, while they may have killed weeds, they also killed fungi and bacteria. Also, the animals that existed here that kind of facilitate this ecosystem and help in the exchange of nutrients are gone. There's nothing living here except cows, and the nutrients that would be in the soil has just been leached out from years of farming and years of cattle pasture and grasses. Lastly, we have root structures. There's no trees here. This is a slanted cinder cone with a really bad slope that makes it so that there's no roots solidifying the soil. It's subject to erosion. And you're going to see, as my first point for erosion, at least, we have the banana plant. The banana plant, as I mentioned, when you do that J root, it firms up the soil and helps build a root structure and prevent erosion. Additionally, the pumpkins that grow outwards with thin roots, they really create that top layer of soil and give it that firmness that we need to be planting our saplings later down the line. As for lack of nutrients, there's a fungi and bacteria mix that I think that's my favorite part of syntropic farming, because it kind of substitutes what fertilizers would do, but it does it in so much more of a specified way with so many fewer unknown consequences. So this is something that I was taught by one of the syntropic farmers we met in the area, Neil, who I previously mentioned. And you would go to a Mabi forest, you'd go to one of the few remaining Mabi forests and collect soil from under some of the healthiest tree species, diverse tree species, but you want to collect the soil there. And that soil is going to be filled with the fungi and bacteria that you need to create a really stable environment, and is going to lock in the proper nutrients that Mabi species would need to survive. And you want to really gather that dirt from under those trees. You mix it with some water and some other things. You leave it out in the sun for a while. And basically, that fungi and bacteria has a population boom in that barrel of water. And then that mix can be used as a fertilizer and spread out through your environment to create a fertilizer that isn't general. It doesn't help both saplings and weedy grass species that are invasive. It's specified to a healthy Mabi forest. So this is a way that we can use fertilizers that don't have all these unintended consequences. They're fertilizers that support what we need, what that species needs, or what that forest type needs, while also not facilitating and boosting the growth of weeds that we're trying so hard to fight against. Other ways that we can add nutrients back in the soil is when we burn when we burn the weeds and woody species, that returns nutrients to the soil, as well as using grazing species that their feces returns to the soil and becomes nutrients. And also the mulch through the decomposition of our banana stalks is returning nutrients to the soil. As for the seed bank, that's something we can't get back. That's something that has been lost, unfortunately. And, we can't just go around sticking seeds in the ground and hoping that at the right time they're going to come through. But we can build animal pathways that allow, from our near Mabi forests, the few remnants that still exist. If we create pathways between these that lead to our cinder cone, we can help bring back some of the species that would naturally be there, and they can help deposit seeds in that environment that are from local Mabi forests. And something like this can be a little complicated. We can't make a strip of forest that connects all of these, because that's something animals may not be comfortable using, and that's a whole other project. But something as simple as, something as simple as doing bird perches that go from one Mabi forest section to another that really inspire birds to move between and transport seeds across these little fragmented areas is a way that we could bring back seeds into the environment. But also keep in mind that we're going to be planting saplings, so we're not entirely dependent on that seed bank. We would just like the accessibility of Mabi species. We want that those seeds to be able to come from a natural Mabi forest into our Mabi forest. Well, how does this story end? I've gone over all these different syntropic methods, and this was my proposal that I had. And I presented it with our paper and presentation to a research advisor, to the landowners, to other researchers who were proposing their own ideas. I was very fortunate to be selected as the person to manage the cinder cone and come up with a method. And it's these strategies that I came up with earlier and mentioned, working along with Neil Shaw, a Syntropic farmer, that were used. And the main thing is they're going to be using banana plants, which that's why I focus so heavily on it. They're going to be interspacing banana plants in between the different saplings they're growing for the hopes of providing shade, but also they're going to be growing them with that atypical dominant point J method I mentioned. So it's going to also really firm up the soil, provide the right amount of shade, and then those stalks are also going to be used to make that mulch mixture I talked about earlier to help with nutrients and also help for water retention. So at this moment, these methods are being used right now on our cinder cone. And it's going to be for the next 5 to 10 years that they're going to be implemented on this cinder cone. And if successful,
Skylar Temple has joined the meeting.
If these methods are successful, then they're going to be applied to the other 6 cinder cones of the 7 sisters and hopefully other places in the world. I mentioned at the start, like the real diversity of issues we're facing and how, every single area that something could go wrong, it almost seems like it has gone wrong with the cinder cone. So I kind of have the New York mentality about it of like, if it can make it here, maybe it can make it anywhere. And that's very general of a statement. But the hope is that if this is successful across all 7 different cinder cones we're working with, it can be later applied to other areas of the world and can kind of be a more sustainable method. Another benefit is that it's sustainable in the fact that think about all these different options I mentioned. Instead of using Roundup pesticide, that's so costly. You're using a more natural, cheaper solution. Or instead of buying fertilizer, it's free to just gather the dirt and create your own fungi bacteria mix. So I want to make a method that can be used in other areas of the world and spread across the world, but also really reduces all these different costs that go into it so that money can be better allocated to other areas. I want to end this presentation before asking for questions for a special thanks to Neil and Jane Shaw. These are the 4th generation farmers I mentioned, and it was their ideas that inspired my ideas that kind of came together and are now being implemented on the cinder cone. I'm really hopeful for the next 5 to 10 years to see how this project develops, and I'm really hopeful that the other 6 cinder cones can be reforested as well. It's worth mentioning that these 7 cinder cones are known as the 7 sisters, and the Aboriginal tribes had a very religious ties or cultural ties to these cinder cones, and those same Aboriginal tribes have been wiped out from the area or assimilated. And it's a real good way to honor the Syntropic farmers who work there, the farmers who are there now, but also the Aboriginal people that found a lot of significance in these cinder cones once. I want to end with some acknowledgements to my other group members of Mary Gum, Kayla Glenn, and Lila Biddle. I want to acknowledge the Native people in that area, as well as Jane and Neil Shaw once more, as well as Sigrid, or as we called her, Siggy, who was our research advisor. Landowners Peter and Aloma Mormon, and as you go through, we have Debra and Deborah Ting and Spencer Shaw, as well as many others. This was a big group project. It took a lot of minds coming together. I'm only just the one presenting it to you. And I'm really hopeful for the future of this project. I hope to see it work, and I hope to see, a change in mindset when it comes to reforestation, because I think there's a lot of side effects of this method, but I think all those side effects are really good, and I'm hopeful to see how it develops. Is there any questions?
Graham, thank you so much. What an amazing talk and a fascinating topic. A couple new elements to me in particular. The J method, I've never heard of that before, but it sounds really, really effective. So yes, please do raise your hand either digitally using the Zoom button or jump into the chat if that's easier for you, and I'll help share those questions. Let's start off with Bill Tharaway. Go ahead, Bill.
Hi, Graham, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thanks for the presentation. It was really excellent. And let me say that we're lucky to have you joining us as a volunteer. So
Thank you so much.
And I'm a member of the Farmers Club in the community I live in. And when I start my crops from seed, I always plant them right side up. I don't want to stress them. So the stem grows up, the roots grow down. It seems pretty logical to me. But your idea of planting it in a sense upside down, so you get that J shape, and you claim that it gives it more stability. I think I'm going to try that with a few of my plants this year.
Yes.
I imagine it takes a little longer before you actually see the stem coming out.
Yeah, I want to also clarify that that method is applied to the banana plant itself. For the saplings, when we bring in the saplings of the Mabi forest species, the tree species we're going to be using, those are going to be planted normally as saplings. But for the banana plant, kind of like what you mentioned, it's one's planted upside down, but it's after about like 2 weeks to a month when the species, or sorry, when sapling is kind of more established itself. And by cutting it down to that atypical dominant point, it's not only a partially developed sapling or banana tree, but it's also cut down to a point where growth is accelerated. So the method wouldn't really work for normal saplings, but for the banana plant in particular, the way it works, it's really effective. So this is more a method to initially prevent erosion and stabilize the soil and create a windbreak. It's not something we're going to use for the saplings later down the line. So I may not recommend for, if you're growing banana plants, I would highly recommend it. But when it comes to like, if you're growing a eucalyptus tree and you cut it down halfway through and put it upside down in the ground, I don't think it would make it too long after that.
I love to experiment. So it's just
just
give me something to play with. See how it compares with the other seedlings.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, if you give it a try, please let me know how it goes. I'd be really interested to see how it works in other species.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, thank you for your question.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Bill. Next up, we have David. Go ahead, David.
Hey, Graham, thank you so much and welcome. I'm wondering to what extent your technique relies on millennia-old Aboriginal techniques. Those of us in the Western Hemisphere here, I think we all immediately think of Three Sisters agriculture as practiced by the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. So to what extent, if at all, are you guys thinking about Aboriginal techniques?
I'm very glad that you brought up that point. The Three Sisters relating also, Three Sisters, Seven Sisters, but the use of, not just one monoculture species, you're using a diversity of species that support each other. Ernst Gotch bases a lot of his methods on these indigenous North American farming techniques of the Three Sisters, but also integrated Aboriginal techniques like the controlled burns and that diversity of plants. So a huge amount of that relies on indigenous knowledge. And that's kind of why I wanted to cement their involvement, but also cement that it's using that knowledge that's not just benefiting, the people who own the land now. It's being used specifically on these really culturally and religiously significant Seven Sisters cinder cone volcanoes. So there's so much of these ideas, methods that are based in Aboriginal and Native American knowledge. And it's for that reason that I was really fortunate and glad that the cinder cones we're working on had such significance, because, if we were to reforest a Mabi species, such an endangered species, I would like it to be first on, the lands and areas that were important to those who lived there previously. Some unfortunate stuff is that it was a diversity of tribes that kind of made up one clan who lived in this area and regarded these Seven Sisters highly. Knowledge of these Seven Sisters and mythology around them wasn't just isolated to that clan, though. It was well known across a lot of Northeast Queensland, the Seven Sisters, because they were so significant to the clans that lived in that area. And, their connection to the land was huge. But at the same time, they were, Yeah, they were massacred, I think, over 100 years ago, and then afterwards assimilated. And now the few remaining members of these tribes who kind of had that connection to the land have been moved to other areas of the world and have been assimilated into a macro tribe, as you'd call it, and have changed their name. So we're kind of working with the Aboriginal and Native American knowledge, yet without the specific to that area, specific to the Cinder Cone knowledge that came from the clan that once lived there. So we're trying to honor them while at the same time learning from them or learning what we can. But thank you for that question.
It sounds like a wonderful project on many levels. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question.
All right, for the next question, we have Kathleen. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Yes, okay. Hello, good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for the great presentation. Here's my question, sir. It looks like you're doing some very impressive work at faunal restoration. Are there any long-term plans to, once you've achieved that, restore, like, I mean, look, you're restoring floral biodiversity. Are there any long-term plans to then restore faunal biodiversity that may have been lost?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I'm going to go back to the map I previously had up of the area that we're working in. So you can see our Cinder Cone is right here, and all that pink area is fragmented Mabi forests. And in the area of the Cinder Cone we're working with, the species I have featured here have gone locally extinct. So we really need to bring back those, animal species. It's not just the plants. So
Victoria Royal Boyd has left the meeting. Raised hand. Kathleen Hutherso raised hand. Close view. Press CMD plus.
Right.
Graham, I think you're muted. Oh.
Yep, sorry. I just wanted to
let that settle.
On my computer. So yeah, no, that's a great point. I propose the use of corridors and planting corridors. If our project is successful in its early phases, then it can only develop in its later stages if it has those corridors and that plant or those animals return. So I propose that the first step of this would be to bring back bird species and just, it's something very easy to do. You just plant. As you can see, there's the Curtain Fig National Park. If you just have a few bird stands in between that are really going to support and encourage birds to move to this area, you're going to have, in terms of animals returning, you're going to have birds coming first. And then if that's successful, then you would want to really focus on the next stage being building corridors. And you can see that while the Curtain Fig National Park is pretty far away, there's a lot of different fragments that can be utilized when you're trying to build these corridors. So totally, we have very much a hope that if this is successful in its initial stages, that we can then focus more on the, not just the flora, but the fauna that would exist there and bring them back. But yeah,
thank you.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
Wait, what about bats? Because they're also a vector.
Bats, that's something I did not consider. I would be really, do you have any ideas?
Well, in terms of restoring them, no, but I know that, for example, that with their droppings, they tend to be a vector for seed pollination, and I would think that they would be an asset to the floral biodiversity in the same sense that the birds are.
That's a really good point. I will definitely. I want to look into that. I did not consider that. I did not talk about that, and I've not mentioned that with my group mates. So, yeah, I want to look into that. Thank you for that point.
Well, thank you. I'm flattered.
Thank you.
All right, so final call for questions. I think Kathleen was the last hand, but I'll pause a moment, make sure anyone who does have a question or a comment can jump in. All right, I don't see any further questions. So once again, Graham, thank you so much for the talk this afternoon.
Of course. I want to thank everyone for showing up, and everyone I have personally invited. Thank you guys so much for showing your support. And everyone who I've not, thank you guys for just coming to my presentation, not knowing what it's about or knowing who I am. This work is really important to me, and I just want to, get the mindset out there of maybe finding alternative forms of restoration. So thank you all for coming to my talk.
Awesome. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe we can catch you for another Zoom down the road as well to talk about another project.
I would love to. Yeah, I also did another research project in Cambodia, and okay. Hi, Mr. Zia. I also did another research project in Cambodia, which kind of had similarly important results to it, and I would love the opportunity to be able to present it. So thank you all so much for coming.
And let me also thank the audience. This lecture series wouldn't be possible without your continued attendance and support. I just want to let you know that we have a pretty solid break, actually much of the month of February. We don't currently have any Monday talks scheduled. So the next scheduled talk is Monday, February 24th, regular time. And it's going to be a visiting author, in this case, Dr. Bill Schutt, who's going to talk a little bit about his book called Bite, An Incisive History of Teeth from Hagfish to Humans. So hopefully you'll join us for that talk, and perhaps I'll see you before then here at the museum as well. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.